The Academy had always felt safe, a fortress of steel and order orbiting above the green world of Chorus Prime, where young minds from across the galaxy came to study the arts of science and war. The halls usually rang with the hum of translators and the chatter of cadets in dozens of tongues. But on that day, safety shattered like glass. A low, grinding alarm split the air, harsh and ugly, its echo chasing through every corridor. Walls pulsed with red emergency lights, washing the silver surface in a sickly glow, and a mechanical voice boomed through the intercom. Containment breach. Predator-class specimen loose. All units evacuate. The words seemed to freeze the blood of everyone who heard them, because a Predator-class was not just another creature in a cage. It was the highest danger mark in Coalition records, the kind of living weapon that even full strike teams handled with caution, and one had broken free. The breach happened inside Xenobiology Class 7, where students had been taking notes on holoscreens only moments earlier. The sound came first, a ripping metal shriek like the scream of a dying starship. Then came the crash. A great steel wall buckled, caved, and burst apart as something vast slammed through it from the other side. Dust sparks and shards of glowing wire filled the air. Desks overturned as cadets scrambled away in panic. The creature stepped into the room with slow, deliberate weight, each footfall leaving dents in the floor. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, its black hide shining wet beneath the flashing lights, plates of bone running like armor across its chest and arms. Its eyes were 2 burning coals of amber, scanning the chaos with an almost human intelligence. This was a Rajak, a beast whispered about even in the deepest training vaults, a predator bred only for war. The instructor, a tall Rhinari with a crest of pale quills, reacted faster than anyone. She snatched a pulse rifle from the rack, snapped the safety free, and raised it with steady hands. For a moment it seemed as though she might stop the horror before it began. But the Rajak moved with terrifying speed. One arm, long and jagged with a natural blade of bone, lashed out. The rifle flew across the room. The instructor fell before she could even cry out. Her body struck the floor hard, and the class broke into screams. Cadets tripped over one another, desperate to reach the doors as sparks from the broken wall fell in burning arcs. Yet not everyone moved. Near the back of the room, one figure remained frozen in place. A young human, dark-haired, lean, his hands locked around the edge of his desk. His name was Elias Vaynar, the only one of his species in the academy, an exchange cadet whose people were new to the stars. His breath caught in his throat as the beast turned toward him. The Rajak's amber gaze locked with his, a gaze that had meant death for so many before. Its chest heaved with a low, guttural growl, the kind of sound that promised slaughter. Every instinct in Elias's body screamed at him to run, to dive for cover, to do anything but stand. But he did not move. He could not move. His legs felt like stone, his eyes locked to the beasts like prey trapped before the strike of a hunter. Then the impossible happened. The growl faded. The Rajak's shoulders lowered, its monstrous arms sinking toward the floor. Its claws clicked once against the steel tiles, and then, slowly, with a movement that sent shock through every witness, the predator bent its knees. The great beast lowered itself down, bowing its head until its amber eyes looked up at Elias from beneath its brow. It did not strike. It did not roar. It knelt. Around Elias, cadets froze in disbelief, whispers breaking through their fear. No one understood what they were seeing. Why had the monster stopped? Why had it bowed to a single human cadet? Elias himself could not answer. His heart thundered in his chest, his mouth dry, his body still rigid. The predator had broken free, and yet instead of claiming blood, it had lowered itself before him as though he alone held the key to its will. The day after the breach, silence hung over the academy like a storm waiting to break. Hallways once filled with chatter now carried only the echo of booted guards and the sharp hum of scanning drones. The cadets spoke in whispers if they spoke at all, their eyes always drifting toward the human who had stood before the predator. Elias could feel their stares pressing against his back, some full of curiosity, others heavy with suspicion. He tried to push it from his mind, but every step through the academy seemed heavier, as if the very air itself had turned against him. His life had changed in the span of a few heartbeats, and he had no idea why. The Coalition High Command did not waste time. Elias was taken from his dorm by 2 armed officers and marched into the cold chambers of interrogation. The walls were bare steel, the light harsh and pale. A table sat at the center, and he was ordered to sit. What followed was not one session but many, each more relentless than the last. Officers asked the same questions in different words. What had he done? How had he done it? Did he have training in psionics? Was he hiding implants? They brought in readers that scanned his brainwaves, devices that traced his heartbeat, machines that claimed to measure the flicker of his soul. Every test returned the same result: human, unmodified, ordinary. But they did not believe it. The Razak had bowed to him, and such things did not happen without reason. Elias had no answers to give them. He only remembered the burning amber eyes, the weight of that moment when the predator lowered itself. He remembered the silence in the room, the way everyone had stared, but when he tried to explain it, his words sounded thin even to himself. He said he had done nothing, and they did not believe him. Hours stretched into days, and still they called him back. Some officers spoke with clipped patience, others with open anger. One accused him of being a threat greater than the Rajak itself. Another called him a weapon of unknown design, and through it all, Elias sat with clenched fists and a pounding heart, unable to explain what even he did not understand. Beyond the academy walls, the galaxy itself trembled. The Drakon swarm had moved like fire across the stars, their fleets tearing through systems with a hunger that no species could match. Where they passed, nothing remained but husks of planets and drifting ruins. Reports flooded in of fleets crushed and colonies devoured. The coalition, a proud gathering of many races, found itself pushed back again and again. Even their strongest admirals admitted the truth in hushed voices. The swarm was winning. Every border world became a battlefield, and every lost battle brought the war closer to the heart of coalition space. For the Academy, the war was no longer distant news. The orbital station lay on the edge of contested territory, a place where the swarm's shadow already stretched. Evacuation drills became daily routine, and cadets were drilled not only in studies but in weapons practice. Ships came and went, bearing soldiers and supplies, while rumors spread faster than truth. The station had once been a place of learning, but now it felt like a fortress bracing for siege. In those tense days, Elias felt the shift most of all. When he walked, soldiers whispered. When he sat in class, instructors watched with sharp eyes. Even the cadets he once studied beside kept their distance. To them, he was no longer simply human. He was something else, something tied to the predator that had bowed. The coalition did not trust him, but they also could not ignore him. He was no longer a student in their eyes. He was a puzzle, an answer, perhaps even a key, and in a war where defeat seemed certain, even the faintest key was too valuable to throw away. They kept the Rajak in a vault deep beneath the academy, locked behind layers of barriers and guarded at every hour by armed soldiers. But even with chains of steel and collars of energy, the creature refused all control. It tore through shock restraints, broke walls of reinforced alloy, and howled with a fury that shook the station itself. Yet when Elias stepped near the cage, the violence stopped as if a switch had been thrown. The beast lowered its head. Its growls softened, and its burning amber eyes watched him with something strange. Something that looked almost like recognition. No officer, no psionic, no alien handler had been able to command the Rajak, but a single human cadet did so with a word. Scientists gathered day and night, pressing Elias with tests, begging him to speak to the creature, to order it to move, to stand, to kneel, to stop roaring. Each time the result was the same. The predator listened to him and him alone. They gave the creature a name, Ashkral, though it was spoken in tones of fear. Some believed Elias had discovered a secret power. Others muttered that he was cursed, and some whispered that humanity itself carried something dangerous inside it, something the coalition had never seen. Elias himself did not understand. He felt no power in his veins, no surge of energy in his mind. He only knew that when he looked into Ashkral's eyes, he felt a strange bond, not of master and slave, but of equals, like two predators recognizing each other across a gulf of fear and blood. He did not admit it aloud, but he felt a strange calm when the beast knelt, as if it gave him strength rather than the other way around. The coalition did not know what to do with either of them. To cage Ashkral was impossible. To destroy him seemed a waste, and to trust him was madness. Yet outside the station, the war grew worse each day. The Drakon swarm advanced like a tide that could not be stopped, their living ships spitting acid storms and devouring whole fleets, their armies of flesh-forged soldiers flooding worlds until nothing remained alive. Reports painted a grim picture. Colonies erased in hours, fleets broken in minutes, commanders vanishing without trace. Fear spread through the coalition like poison, and the whispers turned to desperation. If humanity, untested and raw, could tame a predator, then perhaps there was more to them than anyone had believed. Elias felt the weight of those thoughts pressing upon him each time a commander looked at him, not with respect but with calculation, as if he were no longer a boy but a weapon waiting to be aimed. He hated that gaze, yet he could not deny that the galaxy seemed to need something it had never known before. When the Drakon came at last to the station, there was no more time for questions. Their ships tore open the void, vast shapes of bone and flesh wrapped around cores of living fire, their cannons vomiting storms of burning acid that ripped through shields like paper. Fighters screamed into the black only to be swallowed by swarms of chittering bioshards. The coalition ships that rose to meet them faltered, their lines broken, their guns overwhelmed. Then the boarding spores came, black pods filled with soldiers smashing into the hangars and releasing monsters that clawed and tore their way forward. The academy was no longer a place of learning. It had become a battlefield. Amid the panic, amid the screams, commanders turned not to their admirals but to Elias. And Elias, clutching the rifle handed to him with shaking hands, looked at Ashkral's glowing eyes behind the energy field. He felt the bond once more, strong and certain, and knew the choice had already been made. The predator would not fight against him. The predator would fight with him. And together, perhaps, they would stand against the swarm. The battle outside the academy unfolded like the breaking of a nightmare. The void filled with fire and shadow as the Drakon swarm struck with merciless fury, their ships vast and grotesque things of bone and flesh, their hulls pulsing as if alive, spitting clouds of burning acid that ate through the strongest shields of coalition cruisers. The academy shuddered as the first wave of bioshards struck, each one a living missile that split apart into swarms of razor-winged spawn, gnawing at the station's outer defenses until whole panels buckled and fell away. Inside the station, soldiers and cadets scrambled to holding lines, weapons firing in bursts of blue and red as the boarding pods smashed into the hangars and split open like rotten fruit, spilling out Drakon soldiers with claws of bone and maws lined with endless teeth. The academy was no longer a place of study. It had become a fortress under siege, and death prowled every corridor. In that chaos, Elias stood, rifle clutched tight, his breath ragged, his mind screaming at him to run, but his feet carrying him instead to the chamber where Ashkral had been caged. Around him, officers shouted orders, engineers raced to hold failing bulkheads, and cadets fired wildly into the swarm, but none of it mattered, because Elias knew the station would not survive unless something stronger was unleashed. The guards hesitated when he approached, their eyes torn between fear of the beast and fear of the swarm. But Elias gave no order. He simply stepped forward, and Ashkral rose from his crouch as though he had been waiting. The predator bowed his head, chains clinking, and then with one great pull snapped the last of his restraints, stepping past the barrier with a roar that shook the air. Where the Drakon soldiers tore through the halls, Ashkral met them in a storm of claws and fury, his bone blades cutting through their chitinous armor like cloth, his roars sending them scattering in terror they had never known before. Elias followed close behind, firing his rifle until the barrel steamed, throwing grenades into swarms that came too close, his every movement reckless, yet driven by a fire that burned hotter than fear. Together they cut a path through the invading horde, the boy and the beast moving as one, each watching the other, each protecting the other, and the cadets who saw them whispered later that it was as if the human and the predator had been born for the same battlefield. But the strangest moment came when the echoes of Ashkral's roars reached deeper into the vaults of the station, where other Rajak predators had long been kept in cages for study. Their howls joined his. Their rage grew wild, and with impossible strength they shattered their cells, storming out in waves of black hide and bone armor. Soldiers raised weapons to stop them, certain that the academy would be drowned in blood. But the Rajak did not attack the coalition. Instead, they turned toward Elias, their amber eyes fixed on the human cadet. And then, one by one, they knelt. In the middle of battle, with acid storms burning the hull and Drakon pouring through the station, the deadliest predators of the galaxy bent their heads not to admirals, not to psionics, not to generals, but to a single human boy. The sight spread through every comm channel, soldiers pausing in disbelief, cadets lowering their rifles, commanders whispering words they had never spoken before. They obey him. And when Elias lifted his arm and shouted for them to fight, the predators surged forward as a living wall of fury, tearing through the Drakon soldiers in a storm of claws, blades, and fire. Coalition ships that had been breaking apart suddenly held their lines as the swarm reeled from the impossible sight of their own monsters turning against them. For the first time in the war, the tide shifted, and in that moment, humanity revealed its truth to the galaxy. They were not the strongest, not the oldest, not the wisest, but when predators met their eyes, they knelt, and when enemies met their defiance, they broke. The swarm did not fall easily, for when the Queen of the Drakon herself arrived, the void seemed to tremble beneath her will. Her dreadnought a living mountain of bone and flesh, bristling with cannons that spat rivers of green fire and shielded by endless waves of spawn that darkened the stars. Coalition fleets that had dared to rally were torn apart in moments. Proud cruisers split open like fruit. Frigates swallowed by the snapping jaws of bioships. Entire squadrons erased in storms of acid that burned even through hull plating. The station shook under the Queen's presence, every deck groaning as if the shadow of her mind pressed down on metal and flesh alike. Commanders barked desperate orders, soldiers fought with teeth clenched, but their lines broke again and again, and it became clear that if she was not stopped, the Academy and all within it would burn in silence and ash. It was then that Elias stood once more at the center of the storm, his face pale with exhaustion, his armor dented and scorched, his rifle hanging heavy in his hands, yet his eyes burning with a fire no one else carried. Around him the predators gathered, Ashkrell at their head, their massive frames streaked with blood, their claws dripping, their roars rising like thunder. They waited for his word, and when he gave it, they did not hesitate. Drop pods were prepared in the hangars, small shells meant for boarding actions, barely armored and nearly suicidal to launch against the Queen's ship. But Elias climbed into one without pause, and the predators followed. The launch shook him to his bones, fire screaming past the windows as pods ripped through clouds of living shrapnel and swarms of enemy spawn, half of them crushed before they reached the target. But Elias did not blink, his hands tight on the straps, his heart hammering not with fear, but with a strange calm certainty that they would reach her. Their pods struck the dreadnought's hide like sparks against stone, biting through layers of living armor before cracking open, spilling Elias and his predators into the beating, breathing corridors of the monster ship. The air stank of rot and acid, the walls pulsed with veins and thick fluids, the floor slick with living tissue, but none of it slowed their charge. The Queen's guards came in endless waves, chittering soldiers with claws like scythes and carapaces as strong as steel. Yet Ashkral's fury ripped them apart, and the others followed with a storm of blades, while Elias fired until his rifle glowed and then drew a blade himself, cutting and striking with desperate speed, every step carrying him closer to the heart of the beast. The battle was a blur of fire, blood, and screams, but finally they broke through into the chamber where the Queen herself waited. She was vast beyond reason, her body bound into the walls of the ship itself, her limbs long and sharp, her head crowned with spines, her eyes burning with a psychic fire that poured into Elias's mind like an ocean, drowning him in rage and hunger. Every soldier who had ever faced her had fallen to that will, their thoughts shattered, their bodies broken, but Elias did not bow. His knees buckled, his skull felt as though it might crack, but he forced his gaze upward, locking eyes with the Queen, and in those human eyes she found something alien to her, something no other race had ever shown. Defiance. Stubborn, reckless, impossible defiance. Her voice screamed in his mind, demanding surrender, demanding fear, but he gave her none. And in that instant her will faltered. It was enough. Ashkrell leapt with a roar that shook the walls, his blades carving deep into her chest, tearing through carapace, flesh, and bone. The Queen shrieked in a voice that shattered lights and cracked walls, her swarm reeling outside as her control slipped, her power broken. The predators struck as one, Elias driving his blade with them, and with one final cry the Queen fell silent, her vast body slumping, her psychic grip torn away. Outside, across the void, the swarm collapsed in chaos, ships drifting aimless, soldiers dropping lifeless, the battle shifting in a single breath from certain death to sudden victory. And at the heart of it, covered in blood and fire, stood a human boy with nothing but his stubborn will and the predator who had bowed at his feet. The silence after the Queen's death was louder than any roar of battle, the kind of silence that made soldiers lift their heads in disbelief, and ships halt their guns as if the void itself had forgotten how to make sound. The Drakon swarm, once a storm that devoured all before it, now drifted without purpose, their ships trembling like beasts with their heads severed, their soldiers collapsing where they stood as if strings had been cut. Across the coalition lines, weary crews stared through cracked viewports at the impossible sight of victory. and voices rose first in whispers, then in cries, and finally in thunderous roars that carried across comms from ship to ship. The swarm was broken. The queen was dead. The tide that had drowned worlds was turning. Inside the shattered dreadnought, Elias stood with his shoulders bent and his chest heaving, his rifle gone, his blade slick with black blood, his armor torn and burned. Around him the predators gathered, their bodies battered but unbowed, their amber eyes locked on him with a strange reverence, as if his defiance had become their own. Ashkral, the first who had bowed, knelt now in silence, his roar of triumph still echoing in the corridors of the fallen queen. Elias could hardly believe what had been done, but he felt in his bones that this moment was not his alone. It was humanity's moment, a moment where the galaxy had been forced to see what his people were made of. He had no crown, no rank, no command, yet he had stood where no other could, and even the fiercest of predators had followed. When the survivors returned to the station, the sight of them spread through every corner like fire through dry grass. Cadets, officers, and soldiers alike stood as Elias passed, their eyes filled with awe, fear, and something new, respect. Reports had already flown to high command, carried faster than light, telling of the human cadet who had led the predators into battle and torn down the queen herself. Already whispers had become legends. They tame predators. They break queens. They make monsters kneel. Some feared what it meant, some hated it, but none could ignore it. Humanity, once dismissed as weak newcomers to the stars, now stood marked forever by what Elias had done. In the quiet hours after the victory, Elias sat alone, his hands trembling as he looked at them, wondering if they were truly his own anymore. He had not asked for this, had not dreamed of it, yet it was his burden now. Around him the predators lay in silence, their hulking bodies at rest as though guarding him even in sleep. Ashkral remained closest, his breathing heavy, his massive form scarred yet alive, his amber gaze watching Elias with something that looked like loyalty. Elias whispered that he was no leader, no hero, just a boy who had refused to bow, but Ashkral answered only with a slow nod, as though he understood that this was what made him different. In the days that followed, the coalition began to rebuild, fleets gathering strength again, worlds daring to hope, species long divided speaking with new voices. Yet in every council, in every chamber, one name carried weight greater than any admiral or general. Elias Vaynar, the human cadet who had stood before a predator and made it kneel, who had faced a queen and not broken. He did not seek the title of hero, but the galaxy had already given it to him. And so the legend spread, across stations, across planets, across stars. The story of the day when the predator broke free, when the swarm was broken, when a single human's eyes held fire enough to tame even the deadliest of beasts. For the galaxy had learned a truth it could never unlearn. Humanity was not the strongest, not the oldest, not the most wise, but they were the species that could look into the abyss, refuse to bow, and in that defiance make the monsters of the dark lay down at their feet.